What if a better life begins the moment you stop chasing everything outside you and take your mind back? Few people notice the moment they begin living too far away from themselves. It rarely arrives with drama. More often, the shift is almost invisible. Peace starts depending on outcomes that have not happened yet. Your inner balance begins leaning too heavily on how other people respond, how quickly life moves, whether things unfold the way you hoped, whether the plan is approved, whether the message is answered, whether the future cooperates. After a while, the mind no longer feels steady. It feels borrowed. 2,000 years ago, a man understood this with a clarity that still feels uncomfortable. He was not powerful. He was not protected. He was not even free. Epictetus was born a slave in the Roman Empire, without citizenship, without legal standing, without any of the external conditions the ancient world considered necessary for a good life. By every visible measure, he had almost nothing. And yet he saw something most people, even now, spend their whole lives missing. The deepest form of captivity does not begin when life becomes difficult. It begins when you hand your inner life over to things that were never yours to command. That was the center of his philosophy and the sentence everything else grows from. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Once that line is blurred, suffering multiplies. Once it becomes clear, a different kind of freedom begins. Epictetus was born around 50 CE in Hierapolis in Phrygia, in what is now Turkey. His mother was a slave. He was born a slave. He was eventually taken to Rome and became the property of Epictetus, a freedman who served the Emperor Nero. In that household, he had access to something unusual for a slave: education. He studied under Musonius Rufus, one of the most respected Stoic teachers of the age. Later, when the Emperor Domitian expelled philosophers from Rome, Epictetus left and established a school in Nicopolis in northwestern Greece. He taught there for decades. He never wrote anything himself. What survives comes from notes taken by his student Arrian, mainly the Discourses and the Enchiridion, the handbook. The Enchiridion opens with the most important sentence in Stoic philosophy and one of the most useful sentences ever written for an unstable mind. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Everything that follows in Epictetus is an elaboration of that distinction. It is also the line that makes the rest of his life intelligible. One of the most important philosophers of the ancient world was a slave, not metaphorically, but legally. A man who could not control where he lived, what happened to his body, or how others treated him, became one of history's clearest teachers of freedom. That is not a contradiction. It is the point. When Epictetus talked about freedom, he was not talking about legal freedom. He had known what it meant to live without it. He was talking about something deeper and, in many lives, much rarer. Freedom in the Stoic sense is the condition of not being inwardly compelled by what lies outside your judgment. It is the state of not being ruled by fear, by craving, by vanity, by resentment, by the need for approval, by the panic that rises whenever reality refuses to obey your preferences. That is why his teaching still cuts so sharply through modern life. Most people today are not legally owned, yet they are governed all day long by things they do not control. Their mood rises and falls with other people's attention. Their peace depends on outcomes not yet decided. Their self-respect bends around success, status, money, praise, comparison, and speed. Their inner life becomes a hostage to conditions outside them. Epictetus would say that this is the real captivity. If your peace depends on what other people decide, you are not free. If your self-worth depends on outcomes you cannot guarantee, you are not free. If your mind is constantly pulled around by impressions you have not examined, you are not free. You may have options, you may have income, you may have access, you may have comfort, but none of that equals inner freedom. This is why the first distinction matters so much. Within your power are judgment, intention, choice, desire, aversion, consent, the use you make of impressions, the direction of your will. Outside your power are the body in its vulnerability, reputation, property, the behavior of other people, the timing of events, and the final outcome of many of your efforts. The reason this is difficult is not that it is unclear. The reason it is difficult is that almost every human being almost all the time behaves as if the line runs somewhere else. We live as though inner stability should depend on external response. We act as though calm should be guaranteed by favorable conditions. We expect life to make us secure before we learn to govern ourselves. Epictetus reverses that. He insists that the real work begins by identifying what is actually yours. Not everything that affects you is yours. Not everything that wounds you is yours. Not everything that concerns you is yours to govern. A large part of suffering comes from confusing what touches your life with what belongs to your authority. That confusion is everywhere. Someone speaks badly of you, and your whole nervous system reacts as though your inner condition must now depend on their judgment. A plan fails, and you treat the failure of the plan as though it were the collapse of the self. A person withdraws affection, and you immediately hand them power over your worth. A delay, a misunderstanding, a lost opportunity, a change of market, an illness, a criticism, a rejection, and suddenly your mind is acting as if reality has seized territory that only you were supposed to govern. Epictetus says no. Pain may arrive without your permission. Loss may arrive without your permission. Constraint may arrive without your permission. But there is still a difference between being struck by life and surrendering the government of your mind. That difference is everything. Seek not that events happen as you wish, he says, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly. This line is often misunderstood as resignation. It is not resignation. It is clarity about the direction of effort. Epictetus was not asking people to become passive. He was not asking them to like suffering, pretend injustice is good, or stop acting where action is possible. He was asking them to stop wasting their strength on rebellion against reality itself. There is a difference between working to improve what can be improved and inwardly collapsing because the world failed to follow your script. That is why the Stoic response to difficulty is not numbness. It is disciplined authorship. You do not control what happens. You control what you do with what happens. You do not control whether a body becomes ill, but you do control whether fear takes command of judgment. You do not control whether another person is fair, but you do control whether their unfairness becomes the ruler of your interior life. You do not control whether the day is interrupted, but you do control whether interruption turns instantly into bitterness, self-pity, or confusion. Epictetus understood this not in theory, but in pressure. That is what gives his words their authority. Stoicism in his hands is not a decorative philosophy for calm afternoons. It is an operating system for constrained conditions. This becomes even clearer in his treatment of approval. He saw with unusual sharpness how dependent most people are on the opinions of others. If someone reports that a certain person speaks ill of you, he says, do not rush to defend yourself. Say instead, he was ignorant of my other faults, or he would not have mentioned these alone. The sentence is humorous, but the principle underneath it is severe. The person devastated by criticism has already made a philosophical error. They have decided, without examining the decision, that their inner state should depend on another person's assessment. They have handed the government of their mind to someone who may be distracted, biased, ignorant, resentful, self-absorbed, or simply careless. This does not mean other people's feedback has no value. It means their judgment cannot be sovereign over your soul. A wise person can listen, examine, correct what is true, discard what is false, and remain inwardly their own. An ungoverned person is either inflated by praise or crushed by blame. In both cases, the mind has become dependent on what was never stable enough to carry it. That dependence is exhausting. Most people do not collapse from one great tragedy. They wear themselves down managing impressions, seeking reassurance, negotiating approval, and trying to build emotional safety from sources that can never provide it. Epictetus offers a harder but cleaner alternative. Stop asking the world to hold together what only discipline can hold together. This is why his teaching begins not with theory, but with practice. Every morning is a choice about what kind of person you are going to be. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Before the first message arrives, before the first interruption, before the first irritation, decide. Decide what you are going to value today. Decide what you are not going to be moved by. Decide what counts as good. Decide what does not. Decide what belongs to your authority and what does not. This is not optimism. Epictetus was not telling students to imagine a pleasant day. He assumed the opposite. Difficulty was not a possibility. It was a certainty. The point of morning discipline was not to predict a smooth day. It was to enter the day already in possession of yourself. Marcus Aurelius echoes the same practice. Begin the day by telling yourself that you will meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance, deceit, selfishness, and disloyalty, not as a complaint, but as preparation. A person who has prepared inwardly meets difficulty as something expected, not as proof that life has violated some guarantee it never made. Many people lose themselves before noon because no such decision was made. The day arrives, pressure enters, impressions strike, and the self dissolves into reaction. Epictetus wanted something firmer than that. He wanted a mind that entered the day already under its own government. He was equally severe about self-criticism. The appropriate response to your own errors is examination, not punishment. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. That means two things. First, you must be willing to see yourself clearly. Second, once you have seen clearly, you must stop pretending that continued self-torment is wisdom. Epictetus was not against examining error. He was against the theater of self-punishment that often replaces correction. The wise person studies mistakes like a physician studies a wound, carefully, accurately, without sentimental drama, and with the specific intention of understanding what must be treated. Once the diagnosis is made, pointless suffering adds nothing. Regret that becomes vanity is no longer moral seriousness. It is self-absorption in darker clothing. This distinction matters because modern people often believe that if they keep hurting themselves over the past, they are proving sincerity. Epictetus would say that sincerity is shown by clarity, correction, and better conduct, not by dragging a finished error behind you as though pain itself were progress. That leads directly to one of his hardest demands: honesty with yourself. The hardest person to deceive accurately is yourself, and yet most people manage it daily. They carry flattering narratives about who they are that their actual behavior does not support. They believe themselves patient while behaving impatiently. They believe themselves independent while arranging life around approval. They believe themselves honest while continuously justifying small dishonesties. They believe themselves disciplined while simply repeating familiar patterns. Epictetus was not interested in condemning that. He was interested in exposing the mechanism precisely enough that it could be interrupted. The gap between self-image and conduct closes only when a person becomes willing to observe themselves without instantly rushing to self-defense. This is where the Stoic practice of attention becomes so important. Attention is not just noticing the world, it is noticing your own mind as it moves. It is seeing irritation before it becomes speech, seeing fear before it becomes obedience, seeing vanity before it becomes performance, seeing the impression before you hand it your consent. That last word matters. Much of Stoicism turns on what later readers describe as assent, the act by which the mind accepts an impression as true, urgent, or authoritative. An impression arrives. Someone ignored me. I am being disrespected. This setback is the beginning of collapse. This pain means disaster. This delay means rejection. The untrained mind accepts the first story automatically. The trained mind pauses. Is that true? Is that known? What is actually here? What is being added? What is mine to govern? That pause is small from the outside, but whole lives divide there. Without it, you live at the mercy of appearances. With it, you begin to recover the governing faculty, the rational choosing part of the mind that Stoicism treats as the true center of a human life. For Epictetus, the quality of a life is not primarily determined by comfort, wealth, status, or external security. It is determined by the condition of this governing center. Is it steady? Is it distorted by fear? Is it captured by appetite? Is it clear enough to distinguish what is yours from what is not? This is why he could speak about the good life with such confidence despite his circumstances. A man without property, without legal freedom, Without the external conditions his culture associated with happiness could still be inwardly ordered. Meanwhile, a rich man terrified of losing his comfort could be miserable in a deeper way. The external difference between them did not settle the philosophical question. The question was always the same. What condition is the governing faculty in? When it is sound, comfort can be enjoyed without dependence. When it is unsound, comfort becomes another chain because the mind begins to cling to what it cannot secure. When it is sound, hardship remains hardship, but it does not become spiritual chaos. When it is unsound, even small inconveniences turn into tyranny. This is where slavery itself became, for Epictetus, not a good, but a severe education. He did not glorify oppression. He simply recognized that under conditions he could not change, the question of who he was going to be remained his own. That question was not canceled by injustice. It became more urgent. The same principle appears in ordinary life now. Traffic when you are already late. The difficult colleague. The message that never comes. The illness that interrupts plans. The body that hurts at an inconvenient hour. The family member who misunderstands you. Each constraint reveals something. Not the story you tell about yourself, but what is actually there. Do you immediately collapse into resentment? Do you panic? Do you seek rescue through blame? Do you demand that the world become easier before you can become steady? Epictetus asks a harder question. Under this condition, who are you going to be? That is why philosophy for him is never merely description. It is training. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish with regard to external things. The beginning of change is often unimpressive. It may look like silence when your old habit was defensiveness. It may look like restraint when your old habit was complaint. It may look like not explaining yourself. It may look like not retaliating. It may look like tolerating temporary misunderstanding rather than betraying your own discipline in order to manage appearances. These first movements are not glamorous. They are often embarrassing because they reveal the distance between the person you imagined yourself to be and the person your behavior shows under pressure. Epictetus was not interested in hiding that distance. He was interested in crossing it. This is why the beginning of philosophy is not cleverness. It is recognition. Recognition of how you actually are, not how you would like to see yourself. Recognition without excuses. Recognition without the softening story. Recognition that does not become despair, but becomes the first real moment of freedom, because the self you can finally see clearly is the only self you can govern clearly. And once you understand this, his whole life starts to say the same thing with even greater force. He had been enslaved. He had known physical suffering. He had lived under rulers who could expel, punish, or silence philosophers. He later taught in a provincial city, in conditions far less spectacular than the men who quoted him. Yet from that life came one of the clearest accounts ever given of interior freedom. His influence reached Marcus Aurelius, whose meditations are difficult to understand without hearing Epictetus behind them. It reached later moral philosophy, spiritual discipline, and even modern therapeutic insight. Not because Epictetus offered comfort in the sentimental sense. He did not. He offered something more durable. He showed how a person could stop building their inner life on unstable foundations. That is why his teaching still matters. Not because the ancient world was noble, but because the ancient human problem is still the modern one. People still hand over their peace to outcomes. People still organize identity around reputation. People still seek emotional safety in praise, success, speed, comfort, comparison, and control. People still suffer from confusing what is theirs with what only passes through their lives. Epictetus keeps returning us to the same correction. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Not because the rest does not matter, because the rest is not governable in the way your fear pretends it is. That sentence does not make life easy, it makes life exact. You will still lose things. You will still be misunderstood. Your body will still be vulnerable. Plans will still fail. Other people will still remain other people. Time will still move in one direction. Death will still come. Stoicism does not erase any of that. What it offers is not the fantasy that life will stop being difficult. It offers the possibility that difficulty will no longer automatically become captivity. And that is a different kind of hope. Not the hope that reality will finally become obedient, but the hope that you can become inwardly harder to rule by what is outside you. A better life begins there, not when the world becomes manageable, but when the mind stops demanding that it be. Not when all uncertainty disappears, but when you stop confusing uncertainty with the loss of yourself. Not when everyone approves of you, but when approval is no longer the ground your spirit stands on. This is what Epictetus gave to the world. A philosophy severe enough to survive reality, a freedom that does not depend on comfort, a discipline that begins with the simplest and hardest line of all. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. If that line becomes clear, much else becomes clear with it. Why so much anger is really frustration at what was never yours to command. Why so much anxiety is really dependence on outcomes you cannot secure. Why so much exhaustion comes from trying to govern other people's minds, the future, the body, the market, time itself. Why so much peace returns the moment you stop. Not stop acting. Stop confusing action with control. Stop mistaking preference for authority. Stop building identity around the unstable. Stop asking the world to carry what only character can carry. That is where freedom begins. Quietly, almost invisibly, the way all real changes begin. To see how practical this is, imagine an ordinary day. You wake up and check your phone. One message is colder than expected. Another is missing altogether. A meeting has moved. A plan has changed. A bill is higher than you wanted. Someone else is praised for work you also did. The body is tired. The morning already feels hostile. For most people, the chain reaction begins immediately. The mind interprets, magnifies, predicts, dramatizes, and then calls the entire process reality. Epictetus would interrupt at the first link. What exactly happened? A message was brief. A reply was delayed. A meeting moved. Money is tight. The body is tired. Those are facts. Everything added on top is interpretation. Some interpretations may later prove accurate, but they are still interpretations while they remain untested. That distinction can save an entire day. If you do not make it, you end up fighting not events, but the story your fear built around events. The delayed reply becomes rejection. The changed plan becomes disrespect. The tired body becomes a catastrophe. The difficult week becomes a verdict on your whole life. Epictetus keeps dragging the mind back to the same question. What is actually here, and what is mine to do with it? Not what do I feel like assuming. Not what conclusion would justify my current mood. What is actually here? This is one reason his philosophy feels so modern. It does not ask you to stop feeling. It asks you to stop worshiping the first feeling as though it were a revelation. Impressions arrive quickly. Judgment must not. The gap between the two is where a human being either remains their own or becomes the property of the moment. He also understood that no one becomes inwardly free through one dramatic decision. Freedom is built in small, repeated acts. A person chooses not to answer from anger. A person notices envy without obeying it. A person accepts that another mind cannot be controlled. A person meets embarrassment without collapsing into self-hatred. A person loses something external without losing command of speech, thought, and conduct. These acts look small. Together they create a character that is much harder for the world to throw around. That is why the Stoic path is both humbling and strengthening. Humbling because it removes the fantasy that your suffering is always caused by circumstances alone. Strengthening because it shows that inner order is not an accident reserved for the lucky. It can be practiced. It can be trained. It can be recovered. Epictetus did not promise ease. He promised responsibility. He did not promise that wise people avoid pain. He taught that wise people stop becoming the second author of their own misery. They stop adding panic to uncertainty, vanity to criticism, rebellion to necessity, and self-betrayal to pressure. They learn to suffer less, not because life becomes gentle, but because they stop multiplying what life gives them. There is also a moral seriousness in him that modern readers sometimes miss. The point was never merely to feel calmer. The point was to become better, to become more truthful, more disciplined, less manipulative, less dependent on admiration, less ruled by appetite, less ready to excuse your own bad conduct because circumstances were difficult. Stoic freedom is ethical freedom. It is not just the power to feel less disturbed. It is the power to remain aligned with what you know is right when disturbance arrives. That is why his teaching belongs not only to hard times, but to ordinary time. It belongs to the office, the family table, the train platform, the sleepless hour, the public insult, private disappointment, the slow season, the ambitious season, the lonely season, the successful season. All of them ask the same question in different accents. Will you remain inside your own judgment, or will you be carried away by what is not yours? The answer is never secured once for all. Epictetus knew that. Training is daily because forgetting is daily. Every morning the line must be redrawn. Every evening the day can be examined. Where did I hand myself over? Where did I remain my own? Where did I confuse what I preferred with what I controlled? Where did I let another person's mood become my master? Where did I recover? That kind of review is not guilt. It is maintenance. It keeps the governing faculty awake. And perhaps that is why his philosophy still feels so alive. It does not flatter. It does not seduce. It does not tell you that peace is waiting just outside you in the next success, the right relationship, the better season, or the world's eventual fairness. It tells you something harder and more liberating. Your life begins changing at the point where you stop outsourcing the rule of your mind. And once you see that, the next question arrives with even more force. If Epictetus teaches what to do with your inner life, what happens when the deeper problem is not distraction, but the way you are spending the one thing you can never recover once it is gone?